There we go. I think people have to consent to that. And then Reed, it looks like we've got a couple attendees that are over, that should be in the panelists section. So if you can pop over to that and pull them over into the panelist section, there should be an option that you have there to make panelist. I see Alan and Daniel. And if you're having problems, Reed, oh, looks like you might have got it. All right, so Lee and Reed are here to help facilitate most of the meeting. I'm actually on vacation, but I'm getting things set up here. And then I'm gonna be handing it over to Lee and Reed, though I am gonna be here for a little bit as well to give an open streets update once we get rolling. So I'll let Lee and Reed and whoever is the chairperson facilitate the meeting, and then I will pop on for the open streets discussion and be here for Lee and Reed if you need any technical bits at the beginning. It looks like the recording's on and we have all the attendees in, or all the panelists, ATC members on. If you're an attendee and you have a question, you can raise a hand. You can also put something in the Q&A and Reed can look at those. And Reed, if you need anything, I'll be in the chat box too. So I'll hand this over. Bob, are you facilitating as the chairperson today?
According to Robbie, yes, I am.
All right. Well, then I will hand this over to you.
Okay. Well, we can go ahead and open the meeting. I guess we have. You did that. So do we have anybody for public comment today?
Good question. Reed, are you able to see that now?
I can see it. I don't see anything in the Q&A and I don't see any hands raised.
All right. So if anyone does have a public comment, we do allow 3 minutes of public comment. So if you want to raise your hand or put something in the Q&A, and Reed can bring you in to ask a question or make a comment if you'd like.
Okay. So if anybody shows up, I'm sure we could make time for them at another point in the meeting.
Yep.
Right now, we have our approval of the meeting notes from the July 9th meeting. Does anybody have any comments, concerns, changes they want to add? Seeing none, I would call for a vote to approve the meeting notes. Everyone can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down or sideways. Great, looks like everyone's got a thumbs up there. So since Shane's on vacation and he's only here for the open streets update, maybe we should move that agenda item to the end, make him be here for the whole meeting. But we won't do that to him. So Shane, if you want to go ahead and give us that update, that'd be great.
All right, excellent. So I will do a quick screen share here if I can get this going. All right, so for those who haven't heard, we have finally started Open Streets, and we are doing our first one in Bethel. Cass and I were out there Tuesday setting this up, and so this is just our web page. So if you go to our transportation website under programs and events, we have information here about Open Streets, and there's a little for that neighborhood of what we're doing. and tells a little bit about our first piece and a little FAQ. It's been really interesting. Cass has been doing a lot of work out there since we've set it up. We sent out postcards to let the neighborhood know. Cass has did some reconnaissance. We did some traffic counts. We found that for one of the main streets that we were looking at, we found about 90% of the traffic going on that street was cut through traffic. Just going from one busier street to another to get through the neighborhood. And so basically on this map here, going from Elmira up and over to Bell up to Royal, and then using that to make it easier to get onto Highway 99, because it's easier to get onto Highway 99 from Royal than it is from Elmira. And so neighbors have complained about this and talked about it. And so we were definitely seeing some of that when we went out there. And so some of what we're doing, besides giving space for people to get out and get active in their neighborhoods, is also just to look at that, you know, sort of what issues neighbors are having in their neighborhood. Since we've put it up, we've definitely been hearing a lot from the neighbors. It's been very interesting. Some people excited about it, some people very upset about it. And Cass could go into detail a little bit more because she's been doing a lot of direct communication with people. She had one person who was so upset about it and had some issues with the city in the past that she told Cass all about. And by the end of the conversation, she was wanting to volunteer for Open Streets. So Cass has been doing great work with neighbors and sort of educating them about why we're doing it. One of the major concerns that they have is that they don't want people drawn to their neighborhood because of COVID. They want to keep the number of people in their neighborhoods down. And so that's one of the main concerns that she's hearing about from people. So, you know, this is something that we are doing for the neighborhood, and we want to sort of reiterate that piece that we are not promoting this as something that we're encouraging other people from throughout Eugene to come and use these open streets. These are for that neighborhood. This is a pilot, and we're looking to do this in other neighborhoods. But that's definitely something that we're hearing from people in this neighborhood is, you know, don't bring other people into our neighborhood. So that's been an interesting piece. We knew that was going to be a concern, but it's definitely been one of the ones that's risen. There's a lot of people who are happy that we're addressing the cut through traffic and that we're providing space because there are no sidewalks throughout this neighborhood. So I think there's a lot of really positive things that are coming out of it. Even the negative things that we're hearing is really good feedback for us. It's been a really great learning process. There was definitely a lot of red tape on our end to have to implement just the procedure that we had to go through internally. But now we have that process internally, and it should be much easier to do more of these. Once we dial this one in, we're already looking at the next neighborhoods that we might go to, but we want to get this one settled and done right and sort of address some of the concerns before we go launch another one. It is very easy. As you can see in this picture here, we put out 2 barricades and 2 cones. Some areas we just have 1 barricade that gives information. On the other side of this, one of these barricades, the one that says local traffic only, is a map with some more information and a phone number, just like on the front of this one here, that if they have questions, they can call. Cass is using that phone and responding to neighborhood concerns. So it's been really, really a great start, even though we've had some really tough conversations. I think it's been a great thing for us to be out into this neighborhood. We've worked with the Active Bethel citizens, Safe Routes to School out here, and a lot of people who really wanted this to happen. And even the people, as I said, who have had some negative reactions, some of them have come around a little bit or are at least open to seeing what happens. So we're very interested. We're going to be out there again doing some more counts sort of during about cut through traffic, and then we'll do counts again after. We're planning on surveys, and we're planning on doing lots of promotions within that neighborhood. And so just as this is a Smart Trips style program, we hope to do some programming that encourages people to get out and use these streets, walking and biking, and to patronize the businesses, use the parks and the services that are available. This connects to a lot of different services. The Fairfield Elementary School has the free lunch program. There's programming at Peterson Barn. There's a lot of retail up in that northeast corner, as well as a great little market that we're going to support down in the sort of south east corner there at the very end of below Gilbert Park. It's a great space. It was very interesting to go out there and sort of as soon as we put the barricades up, talking to people who were already out walking and biking and who were excited for this. And so we'll see where it goes. It connects to the 99 path, the Roosevelt path, which connects to 99 in that new section. So that's been interesting to see. And then that Lark Park is really a sweet park that's right off the Roosevelt path there. We couldn't find a good way to connect open streets down to that park, but if you can get down to Roosevelt path and then connect over to it, it doesn't quite make a loop, but it's a great start. I'm very excited that we're able to launch it. Cass has been doing great work with it, and I'm excited to see where we go. This is in through mid-September at least, and we hope to get another at least one or two launched to see how they go, but this one's really our focus for the next week or so. I'd be open to any questions.
Shane, I have a question. Is this map that you just were presenting, is that on some of the sandwich boards at the opening or the entrance of the open streets?
Yep, it is. And
Okay.
there's also, we don't currently have much wayfinding except for the maps. And so we have maps all around, but you know, being out there, I realized we really need to do some wayfinding. So we have some route stickers, route arrows on the way, and we're gonna just route arrow the whole thing just to make it super easy for people to know. You know, they don't have to think about it. They can just follow the arrows and do
Stickers on the pavement?
stickers on the pavement. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And the businesses that are recognized on that map, are they aware that they're being highlighted?
Yes, yeah. Cass made connections with those businesses and talk to them and let them know about it and that we were doing this and that they're going to be on the map and that we're going to be in contact with them to do some promotional pieces. We're hoping to do some like free ice cream day at the little corner market and do some things to encourage people to get out and use this. And so, you know, we'd say, you know, the secret password is.
That's great. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Shane, I'm curious about how data is being collected. So obviously you have folks before and then.
Yep,
What's happening
we
now?
did some observations before, and then we're working with Lily and Ophelia, our transportation interns, that will get some counts during. We'll go out on some weekends. We talked about this weekend, but it's hot and it's the first one, and so we want to give it a week of kind of getting settled in, and then go out there and see some of the numbers that we're seeing weekdays and weekends. As I mentioned, there are definitely people out there using it. We talked to people who are like, oh yeah, I ride this all the time. People who just get out walking in their neighborhood already. And we want to encourage those people. And we even talked to some people about highlighting them, that they're already doing this. And much like a lot of our Smart Trips programming that we do, we like to highlight regular people that are already doing this and have them give some testimonial about why they do it, and encouraging other people to get out and try it too.
Cool. And then like depending on if the numbers of folks are much higher or much lower than you expect, do you think that'll inform the other routes?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it'll just help us understand the system a little bit more. And we're planning on doing some surveys. And if we see that the numbers are pretty low, we can, ask people what would encourage them to use it more, or why aren't they using it. So I think that just the numbers on their own probably won't be super useful unless we're able to collect some of that survey data. All right. So that's my hope, is to get both the counts and some survey data.
Right.
Anybody else have any questions?
And I'd be happy. I know that we have a pretty open agenda. It didn't look too full. So if there are questions from attendees as well after the ATC has time. Oh, I see that there was something. Oh, put one up asking from Vicky, what other neighborhoods will have open streets? And we are looking at a few different neighborhoods, both in, I think the next one that we'd be looking at is in the Northeast neighborhood. It would kind of connect with our Northeast livable streets that were going to be, being built, and just that engaging that neighborhood a little bit more. And then also the Friendly neighborhood is another one that has asked to have something happen in their neighborhood, and we have a potential route for there. So we have still to do some more neighborhood outreach, but those are the two neighborhoods that we know we're going to look at for implementing this summer, hopefully. And then, this is definitely a pilot program. This is something that we're seeing how it's working, and adapting and figuring out what's working and where we might implement it next.
Steve, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I was just, I guess, Shane, it's been a little while. I'm wondering if there's going to be an opportunity at the end of the evaluation to sort of come back and circle back and say, what were the objectives and goals we were trying to achieve? And does the data that we're capturing answer the question? I went out Tuesday and it was pretty early, I guess. I wandered around a little bit. Honestly, I had a little bit of difficulty telling which, by activity level, it's kind of difficult to tell one street from another in terms of, what was going on out there. So it looked good. It looked good for the residents. I'm just wondering how we're going to capture the success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tuesday, and that was the day that we installed it. So, yeah, and it's definitely, there's a lot of quiet neighborhood streets that are in that area. But, we really felt that we wanted to highlight a route through there just so that we could limit that cut through traffic. And if we do push it in, push that cut through traffic through, that it gets pushed to a main street, and like a neighborhood collector street instead of a neighborhood street. And so that's part of what the fine tuning will be, is making sure that that's happening and seeing if we need to do some other partial closures on other streets that people end up being pushed to instead of the collector street. And yeah, some of it will be data that we get as far as numbers, but it's also going to be a factor of what we find out from people who are actually experiencing it and what they like or don't like about it. And I think that will vary also depending on neighborhood. So it's, it's part of a pilot project, and this is the first, and we'll see. We're also definitely hearing from other communities that are implementing these as slow streets or healthy streets. And we're talking with them about what they're finding and how they're making changes. And we were able to learn some things and adapted our program even before we launched it from them.
And Nick, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was wondering, because we usually do a lot of stuff with Facebook outreach. I was wondering if each of the street areas had like a Facebook group, or maybe if the community itself, I know the Bethel community has its own little groups of different things, and maybe if you created some way of joining people who have gotten a chance to participate on the streets, then you can do a rough count of that. And obviously that wouldn't be the grand total of everyone, because not everyone would use it and also post on the Facebook group. But then that would possibly be something you can highlight in the City of Eugene's Facebook groups, and like connecting all those that way. I don't know if you guys have done similar stuff, because I know you do a lot of outreach like that.
Yeah, and I know that Kelsey and Cass are talking about the community outreach piece and ways of getting it out, especially as we're focusing on the neighborhood and really wanting to promote it into that neighborhood. And Cass has met with the active Bethel citizens who were very active for a while and then not as active, but are sort of ramping up again. And so I think that they've been really interested, and they voted on this actually as an agenda item, that they wanted to see this happen in their area. So they're definitely engaged and interested, and, are beginning to, look at how they're going to promote it within their community.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you, Shane. I guess you could probably go back to vacation now.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. I think I'm on the agenda for something else that Reed can handle. But I'll be on for a little bit here just to check on the background to check.
Yeah, the next thing is the bike share, scooter share, which you're listed as a co-presenter on.
Yeah, Reed can give a good update, I think.
All right.
For a couple more minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shane.
Okay, so we can move on to that one, Reed, if you're ready. Bike share, scooter share updates.
So as you're probably aware, we have Peace Health Rides is what I call on life support right now. We have 3 temporary employees who are performing maintenance on the bikes and doing some rebalancing services. We've also contracted for all of our software to continue to function, as well as contracted with a call center. So if people are having problems, that they can call the number that's written in the app and also on the signs, and be able to get a hold of somebody if they have an issue. So it's working right now. We're not really expanding it, nor are we marketing it all that much. We're just trying to move to the next phase. And that next phase is contracting with an operator, somebody who will take over all of those contracts and operate the system and grow the system and do special programming and all of that sort of stuff. And so what is interesting about this time is that our operator isn't the only one that's folded during COVID. There's been some others. And so all of the smaller communities in Oregon that had like Zagster service, which was another operator, those are all gone. So the only operating bike share services right now in Oregon are Bikey Town, which is in Portland, and us. All of the smaller operators identified a need for some kind of program. And so ODOT stepped up Oregon Department of Transportation and said, okay, we'll send out a request for information and see what kind of vendors and operators are available for the state system if we're going to develop something like a statewide bike share system so that you could move seamlessly from Corvallis to Salem and have basically the same app on your phone and be able to access a bike share system. And so they received 12 or 13 applications from for-profit vendors who are interested in providing some type of service. They also received one nonprofit operator service, which largely depends on Eugene using them as our operator and then basically extending those services to the locals. And what's attractive about that is that it recycles the Bikey Town bikes, which they are now getting rid of because they've gone with an all new vendor. So there's 1,000 of those old Nike bikes in Portland right now that need to find a home somewhere. And there's a strong preference amongst them, as well as I think most people in the state to reuse that infrastructure and put it back into the service of bike share and not just recycle those bikes, which is what happened with, I think, a lot of those Zagster bikes, as well as a lot of the jump bikes. So there's a lot of complication in this. So for Portland to get rid of those bikes because they used a state grant for it, there's a disposition process that they have to go through. They're leery about what that might entail. There's also acquiring that equipment. So if Corvallis wanted 30 bikes, they'd have to purchase those bikes somehow. Where does that money come from? And then there's all of the contracting, because if the locals wanted to use the same system that we have, they would have to use basically the same software that we're using, which is through a vendor called Mobility Cloud. So there was a meeting convened earlier this week by ODOT. We talked with all the locals, we talked with some nonprofits, and we said, okay, what is the appetite amongst these smaller communities to have a statewide bike share service that is uniform and that would allow users to move from one community to another, recognizing that that means that those locals would have to use basically the same infrastructure that we have. And obviously that's our preference because we own our stuff. So all of the bikes and everything that we have are ours. And so we want to continue on with that system. Because we're doing all of the contracting with all of the vendors, we thought it might be easiest for somebody like Corvallis to just jump onto our contract and then to be able to secure bikes through whatever process ends up with happening in like Portland. Although the Mobility Cloud vendor is now making or manufacturing more of those same bikes. So you could also purchase those new, but I would assume that there would be a markup and a timeline for doing that. So there's a lot going on right now. We've also talked about sending out a local RFP or RFI from the city of Eugene just to figure out what is our best option. And it may or may not align with whatever that statewide process is. What staff has been told, what Shane and I know from folks at the city of Eugene, is that we want to be out of the bike share business as soon as we can and to contract with a vendor, because a lot of the contracts that we entered are short term. And if we are going to extend that term, then we need to go through a more competitive process. And so the way that we're set up right now means that we need to move on as quickly as we can. And so then it becomes sort of a timing issue with what other communities want to do if they are interested in more of a statewide system. So there's a lot to unpack there. And as you might imagine, you know, there's a lot of complexity in it. And it's going to require a level of coordination that, quite frankly, we haven't decided that we want to take on yet. So what I'm going to do, Shane and I, next week is we're going to meet with folks at the city and kind of figure out how we want to lead this. It could be that we decide to lead a statewide process because we have the infrastructure, so we have that vested interest in making sure that that infrastructure is supported, and then to give our members a little bit more flexibility, and that if they go to other communities, they'll have the same system and be able to use the same app. And because we're developing all of these contracts anyway, developing some additional jump on language for smaller communities might not be such a tough thing to do. but we're going to have to decide to take that on. We're going to have to decide what that timeline is. We've talked with some of the potential vendors on that, and they think it's okay because Eugene is really going to run the system. We've got a Title I sponsor who gives us money to pay for operations, and we've done in non-COVID times enough ridership that we're basically breaking even on the system. And so there's not a whole lot of risk with an operator jumping into our system, but with those other smaller systems, they generally operate because you build to a certain scale, which allows them to be able to, spread those costs out a little bit. And again, that's sort of the benefit of a statewide system, is that if Eugene is taking on a lot of that cost, because we are a successful system and a successful operations model, that we might be able to provide, more of the same to other communities, and so that they all wouldn't have to hire their own general manager and their own marketing crew and their own, insurance provider and all of that stuff. So basically, we're all sharing the cost of that. So there are pros and cons of doing all of this. We have a strong preference for a nonprofit, so that whoever we contract with is dedicated to the business of bike share and growing the bike share operations and making sure that we're getting more people on bikes and growing our transportation options suite so that we have more opportunities for folks to use active transportation. And if we can stand something like that up, that is a nonprofit and is supported by an existing nonprofit, that might be the best way to go. And so right now what we're struggling with is, do we do the statewide thing, which has a lot of unknowns, or do we try to do something more local, which would, potentially serve our needs just as well, because it would allow us to expand into Springfield, for example, and everything we want to accomplish with that. So, yeah, and that's all stuff we learned in the past couple of days. So, and so that's just sort of me talking at you and saying, this is everything that we're thinking about right now. And if you have any comments about that, go ahead.
Does anyone have any comments? Nick, go ahead.
I think that there's a lot of important information here, and there probably should be some sort of resolution or write-up or somehow something that we as a committee put forward to support something that, once we know a little bit more information, I think you just vomited a lot of information out on us, and I really appreciate that, because it was super well put together and really helped me get an idea of how complex that you were talking about it is. But either way, I think that I wholeheartedly support reusing the bikes that are available and trying to limit them being scrapped. Out of all of the stuff that you talked about, there's lots of confusion in there, but I think that I would always support reusing something and not scrapping it and buying new things, especially if they're just up in Portland and they're housed and they're ready to be put on the streets.
Reed, can you clarify whether the Bikey Town bikes would come to Eugene, or would they be used elsewhere around the state?
Most likely elsewhere, although there's 1,000 of them. And so there's likely to be a quantity available that exceeds what the statewide demand might be. And so we could use those bikes. They are different than the ones that we have here. And so there's some additional complexity there in that we would be servicing 2 different types of equipment.
Yeah, because their hardware and their software isn't necessarily compatible. They'll have to fit, their locks will have to fit into our stations, and
that is
the software piece
standardized. So that part fits perfectly. It's just the bikes that are in Portland use a shaft drive, and there are some other minor differences in how the bike is set up, but all of the microcontrollers and lock mechanisms are exactly the same, which is one of the things too that we've been sort of saying, okay, other smaller communities, if you jump on the Mobility Cloud system, we can retrofit basically any bike with that microcontroller. And so you can use cargo bikes or tricycles or like whatever you would want to, and still have that same type of connectivity and use the same app for all the communities. So that's another potential, is that folks find their own bike solution and then use the Mobility Cloud technology And I think there's at least one vendor out there, maybe two, that are using the mobility cloud microcontrollers. And so there is some flexibility there.
Go ahead, Julie.
Do we know how many communities there are that were, how many communities are we talking about that have sort of ditched bike share because of the, you know, the current situation? How many other communities are there?
So it was Bend, Ashland, Corvallis, Salem, might be another one in there. And then each of those has sometimes, especially with like Ashland, has a couple, like Talent is like right next to it, where they had at one point some plans to expand, or actually they were too big at one point and then they contracted, but if they could develop to scale, then they could expand again. So it's a few, and it's actually quite a few on the I-5 corridor, as well as the Amtrak line. So again, there's some benefit to doing it, to looking at it as a statewide system and a statewide operator, but there's more complexity too.
Anyone else? Alan?
Clearly, there's a lot of questions, but on the surface, my thinking is that the statewide system would benefit Eugene, and that when we have people coming from out of the area, that they would be then able to use their own app and card and so forth to be able to use our system, and that just generally promoting bike share culturally across the whole state will make it a kind of service that is widely accepted. So while I can see some of the advantages of Eugene sort of striking out on its own, I think that overall the extra effort could very well be worth it.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I would find the idea of a one statewide system to be very attractive and enticing. I could see a lot of benefit there. I could also imagine it becoming an incredible amount of time and resource drain on staff. So I see a Scylla and Charybdis there. I guess in hindsight now, looking back, owning the bikes looked like a lifeline before. It could be that there's an anchor tied to it. So I'm not quite sure how to understand that whole thing, but I would just counsel, obviously there's a lot of capital already sunk into the bikes. I would look very carefully at the cost benefit analysis in terms of the amount of resource and time that has to be put into making that work on a larger system.
And I would just like to clarify too that when I say statewide, it's everybody but Portland, because Portland is now doing their own thing.
Well, it's super interesting, and you know, yeah, I can really see the benefits. Is there any possibility of some kind of subsidy coming out of the state to support a system? Because it seems unreasonable that, one organization, if it's a statewide system, when are we going to, where's the money?
Yeah, ODOT has stepped up and they've already dedicated $100,000 to this, as well as the RFI process that they've already done. They've got another $5,000 that they're going to dedicate to, I think, somebody they have on contract for a white paper about what's available. Because one of the things that I learned on our phone call is that I think folks who had a system think that the market hasn't changed very much, and that's absolutely not the case. Bike share is no longer dropping off bikes in a community and making a system work, because they're not capitalized the way that they used to be. And so you have to be a lot scrappier if you want to have bike share. And so that means you have to have some kind of subsidy. ODOT recognizes this. They have some technology innovation funding that they were going to use for transportation options programming. It's about $100,000, which they could throw right into this and help us get some of those contracts set up. But beyond that, it's going to really be about marketing, getting sponsorships at these local levels, which it sounds like a lot of these communities have already done some of that outreach. And there are folks who want to sponsor stations. And this is how bike share used to work in 2008 when it first started, is that Bob's Barbecue would say, I want a station out here. And then they would, you know, donate $10,000 into the system. And then that $10,000 would be used to purchase the equipment and to operate the system. And then user fees would augment that. And so I think what we're trying to do is push folks back to that model, because that's what we know is sustainable. Because just like transit, this doesn't operate at 100%, you know, recovery at the fare box. You have to subsidize it in some way. And generally you do that through sponsorship. So we're trying to educate more of the local communities about what that looks like. And that means they have to buy their equipment or they have to sign on to a statewide thing. And I think ODOT is willing to step up. They want bike share to work as well. They spend a lot of time getting people out of cars and promoting active transportation and thinking about the first mile, last mile problem of transit. And bike share is a logical fit for that. Unfortunately, because the market got inundated with capital, the operations models changed 6-7 times in the past 10 years. And so what we're back to is what was sustainable from the outset, which is that somebody actually has to take the risk, purchase the equipment, and then figure out how to develop enough contracts and get enough ridership to sustain a system. And that is getting more complex too, quite frankly, because the industry has moved more toward an e-bike platform. And an e-bike needs to be touched every day. You have to charge that battery somehow. And so you need more techs out there. You need more service, you need more response. That all costs money. And you don't generally make that up by charging a larger fee, because at some point it becomes easier to take an Uber. So non-electric standard pedal bikes that are bike share bikes, that market is shrinking, unfortunately. But Mobility Cloud and some others have recognized that this is what was sustainable and will probably continue to be sustainable. So again, yes, I think there's more money out there. Just when the RFIs were submitted, there were some folks who also said that they had talked to some of, like, we are contracted with Peace Health, our local, you know, medical providers. There's some more of those out there potentially in the state who would, you know, like to help us out with this system. And Peace Health may be willing to step aside as a title sponsor and be able to work with some other folks. And so there's some opportunities out there for some additional revenue. We just have to figure out what that model should look like.
So Reed, we have a message from someone watching who says, how urgent is the project of shifting this ownership, and how soon do you want to have it done? You're muted. You're muted, Reed.
Yep. Got it. So yeah, unfortunately, some of the contracts that we entered into were short-term contracts. And so the system was initially supposed to exit Eugene on June 1st. We got that extended to June 30th. And so most of our contracts start July 1. We're already in mid-August, and a lot of those were like 3-month contracts. So we're getting to the point where we're going to have to make a decision, and we'd rather not continue to re-up these contracts in perpetuity when we know ultimately it's going to go to a different operator. And we would like to be able to contract with the new operator basically as soon as we can. Shane was still on the line. He'd say that his timeline is end of the calendar year. So we're looking at hopefully figuring something out by December. ODOT's timeline is sometime in 2021. One of the nonprofits that said that they would be interested in setting up a nonprofit for the state said that they're thinking of 2021 as well. And so that's part of what we need to figure out as a city, and part of what that conversation I mentioned I'm going to set up with some management team folks next week is about, is when do we have to move? How quickly do we have to move? What are our preferences? How do we do that? Those sorts of things. Because right now, I think we've established some preferences and we've identified some opportunities, and now we need to decide.
Okay. Does anybody else? Oh, Josh, go ahead.
I have a question for the committee. Do we want to take some sort of position on this, make a formal recommendation to city staff?
So a formal recommendation on how they should move forward with bike share, or?
Right, like, you know, a potential motion could be supporting a statewide system that, you know, staff should pursue that, which may assist them when they're talking to leadership who wants to have this done quickly as opposed to long-term. But I think that's dependent on the committee actually supporting that notion.
I guess I would suggest, Josh, if you wanted to go ahead and put that before the committee, if you want to do say that as a formal motion, we could look in, for a second and then have some discussion, and then we would vote on it if it was seconded and move forward.
Okay. So I guess I move to support city staff exploring a statewide option for the future of bike share.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Grace seconded. So we'll open it up for discussion. Does anybody have any comments, anything that they would like to add to the motion, or something they would like to add for information to city staff? Go ahead, Robbie.
Yeah, I'd like to add something about Nick's point about trying to recycle those bikes in there somewhere. I don't know exactly how to wordsmith that into what Josh said, but I think it's important to add.
So Josh, would you accept that as a friendly addition to your motion?
Yes, I support the idea. So one thing I don't like is voting on motions that I'm not clear what they say. So we should make sure to wordsmith this, but you know, supporting a statewide program in order to help save the bikes in Portland, or something better worded. I'd appreciate help. Maybe somebody can type something in chat.
Well, we'll go ahead and do that. And if people want to put something into chat, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we have all of the discussion. So as I have it right now, the motion would be that we as a committee move to support the city staff's move towards a statewide plan, and as a friendly would encourage city staff to explore the option of recycling bikes that are currently no longer in use to maintain the use in a system somehow. So not perfectly worded right there, but at least it's it gets both of those points together. Reed's got it in there. So can everyone see the chat line? I'll read it. Reed wrote, motion to support statewide bike share operator that reuses Portland bike share bikes. Short and sweet. Any other discussion?
It would
Okay.
sure be nice if a user of bike share in Portland could come to Eugene and seamlessly get on one of our bikes too. This doesn't necessarily belong right here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Julie?
I would hate to see us, you know, doing our bike system in order to get a statewide system. So, you know, I love the idea of a statewide system, but I would not want to sacrifice Eugene's system in order to have that. So I don't know if we can craft the motion a little tighter rather than say we support it, we support more exploration, or we support it if it's, you know, if it benefits Eugene. Just, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we you know, we have a good thing going. We're likely to have that. Yeah, if it does not degrade the service level of service for Peace Health Rides. I mean, it's a lot for somebody to take on a statewide system, and it's a big jump, and it's exciting, and I'd like to see it. but I'm just a little cautious as well.
Julie, do you like the language Reed added?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay, then I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
Yeah, it kind of opens up the interesting question. If I felt like I needed to go to Ashland and I hopped on a Peace Health Rides bike and I rode to Ashland and they were part of a statewide system, could I just park it down there? Grace, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just have a question if we want to make any recommendations about the timeline in terms of how long we think the city might want to pursue a statewide option before kind of pivoting to a Eugene option, if we have any ideas about that. And it doesn't have to be part of the motion, but if we just have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, Grace, we don't control that, unfortunately. And what Shane and I were trying to get out of the interested party for the statewide system was, could we start running that now with just Peace Health Rides and then be able to expand over time? And they said, yeah, that's probably how it would work.
Okay, so we do have the motion on the table. That there is no more discussion, I'm going to say we should vote on it. And I'm going to reread the motion before we go ahead and have a vote. So as I see it, the Active Transportation Committee moves to support a statewide bike share operator that reuses the Portland share bikes in as far as it does not degrade the level of service for Peace Health Rides. We can go ahead and have a vote on that with thumbs up, thumbs down, or sideways. Looks like we're all thumbs up on that one. So I guess it passes. Anyone?
Reed just added in the caveat about, do we want to recommend that we go with a nonprofit operator?
Yeah, that would have been my intention with the motion.
So we're going to go ahead and add that as an additional friendly amendment. Does anybody have any objection to that? Seeing none, Reed, can you go ahead and add that language to the motion? Okay, so I guess it is now time to move on. So it's 6:23. We're well ahead of schedule. We were only supposed to start this discussion 3 minutes ago, so we're well ahead of where we're going on this. And the next item is subcommittee reports. And I guess I can go ahead and say that the program subcommittee has not met. So we would have nothing to comment on. So is there someone from infrastructure that would like to comment? Oh, Pete, go ahead.
Okay, we actually, Reed gave us a very good discussion about the bike share, and some of the things he talked about tonight were actually updates from what he told us. And he gave us one of the things he put out on the table that you guys, that everybody should be thinking about, especially the program committee, subcommittee, if they ever get the meeting again. Set the 13th Avenue two-way bike thing is pretty near to being completed, and they're thinking about how to get people out there to volunteer to help kind of get people to know how to use that system and things like that. Reed had a little bit better description in the discussion. So it's those are kind of the two big things that we talked about. So I'll turn it over.
Okay, Josh, you had a comment?
Something we also discussed that I think would be good to bring before the entire group is we talked about using pavement bond money, the portion that's carved off for bike and pedestrian use on bike parking in needed areas. And it was the feeling of the subcommittee that that was probably not an appropriate use of those funds. But if there's interest in the whole committee discussing it, because I don't think that that money belongs to the infrastructure subcommittee alone. So.
Maybe somebody from the infrastructure subcommittee can just give us a brief explanation of your thinking there.
So it's, and I'm sorry, Reed, if I'm making a hash of what the proposal was, but there are times when an entity, an organization or a business will contact the city and say, hey, I want bike parking here. And there's no real source of funds to provide that additional bike parking. My personal feeling was if a business wants more bike parking, they should pay for that because it's not that expensive. And the pavement bond money is, you know, bike parking is cheap, and so we could provide a lot of it, but it's also a very limited pool. And I think Alan had some points about appropriate use of funds. He sits on the street review panel, and maybe he can speak to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. You know, the pavement bond measure has primarily been used for between the curb repairs and not for temporary kinds of improvements. And a bike rack could be moved if needed. It might be temporary for a business while the business is in existence. So as much as I support bike parking, I'm also trying to be responsive to taxpayers in general. And I think the other committee members on the street repair review panel would probably have a similar viewpoint as well, that might, at least as the pavement bond measure is currently written, is probably not designed for that purpose, although there's certainly some gray area.
Yeah, so the genesis of this was that parking services used to pay for on-street bike corrals, but nobody's parking downtown anymore, and so they don't have the revenue that they used to, and they're not going to do that anymore. So if we wanted to continue to provide some kind of a program where we paid for on-street bike corrals, there are some folks who think that the pavement bond measure would be a good source to do that. And so I said, let's run it by the ATC before we make any decisions on that. And personally, I agree with what Josh and Alan had to say, is that doesn't really seem like a permanent thing. That's not a concrete structure necessarily. And I think the whole idea of an on-street bike corral is that it is sort of a temporary thing. And when you end up redoing that street, that you accommodate what's needed there, you know, through whatever that design is. The other thing that we talked about in group was that, unfortunately, one of the things that a property owner who wants to add bike parking to their property has to do is they have to get, if they're going to put it in the public right of way, so if they're going to put it on the sidewalk or in the planter strip or somewhere outside of their immediate building envelope, they have to pay a revocable permit fee, and that's $500. And so a bike rack is about $150. And if you needed 2 of those, that's $300. Now you've just put $500 into a permit. And that if we're going to do anything, we should be thinking about reducing that permit fee rather than actually purchasing the racks themselves. And I like that idea too.
Yeah, I like that idea as well. Almost if, you know, the cost of the infrastructure that they're adding could be somehow deducted from the cost of the permit. I don't know. Nick, did you have a comment?
Yeah, if like we could use some of that fund to subsidize it, to almost pay for some of those fees. So you can keep them in place for other types of things, which they would still be probably useful for, since I'm sure that redacted permit or a cancelable permit, whatever you just term that, probably used for multiple different things in the right of way of the area. But maybe because it was an infrastructure for bicycles, we could almost add that as a reason to support it in that financial way. And maybe there are other things like tool poles and other ways that we can support businesses and buildings from having access for bicycles, or if you had things that they would help support the right of way and people with mobility issues or walking and things like that to help improve that in their front area, you know, kind of wrap it into a bunch of different things that might be able to help out versus just, you know, having them pay for it might be a good use of that. Oh.
So do we need to do anything else here? I think it was more just information, and at least the ATC as a whole kind of understands what the issue is that infrastructure was speaking to.
Yeah, we'll get that in the minutes. The other thing that we talked about was super sharrows. And when we talk about super sharrows, we're talking about basically an increased prevalence of shared lane markings along a corridor. The only place where we have super sharrows right now is on Willamette Street between 13th and 11th. And a more appropriate facility there would probably be bike lanes or separated anything. We weren't able to do that because of on-street parking demands, as well as there being a fire station at one end of it. So we weren't able to make that work. And there's probably a couple other streets in town like Blair Boulevard that should probably have something else there than what's there now. And we had talked with Public Works Maintenance about installing super sharrows there. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit with the ATC about, do we think that that's a good idea? And I think most folks think that those 2 blocks of Willamette make a lot of sense because you can sort of point to them. I've had folks tell me that it's clearer what you're supposed to do in that environment, and that there are probably a couple more locations around town where we might want to do something like that. So interested in additional thoughts about that.
Well, I can go ahead and add just on Willamette. One of the things that makes it very apparent there is the bulb outs and the way that street in that section is kind of constructed. It gets a little narrow, and so it makes a lot of sense to, I would think, to cars that, yeah, bikes don't have anywhere else to go except moving out into the lane. You get the super sharrows as that visual reminder. So I think in areas where you wouldn't have maybe the same visual cues to the drivers that are outside of the super sharrows, it might be a little more confusing, but I don't know. I love it in that little section. And the speed in that section is low enough too, where you're not really going that much slower than what the speed is allowed there, so.
One thing I spoke about during the infrastructure committee regarding super sharrows was having some established criteria for when they should be used and when they might not be used. And I can imagine that one of the criteria would be that the speeds were below a certain threshold.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, the intention of shared lane markings really is that, well, they're not allowed on any street that's posted at 30 miles an hour. And we don't do any that are above 25. And I think what we're moving toward is 20. And so Blair is posted at 20, Willamette is 20. All commercial business districts are actually 20 miles an hour statutorily, but we don't necessarily have 20-mile-per-hour signs out everywhere. And so that's a supplement to the shared lane markings in those environments. And to Alan's point too, shared lane markings should not replace a dedicated bicycle facility. And our emerging street design standards are pretty clear about that. So I hope that we wouldn't misuse them, but we should probably develop some standards that get into the nuts and bolts of it so that we have support for that.
So I don't like Sharrows. I don't feel any safer when I'm riding with a Sharrow, and I've definitely still had, you know, negative interactions with folks who clearly don't understand or see them. And I also feel similarly about them as I do to marked crosswalks, where it's like, if there are Sharrows, then it's like the presence of Sharrows makes all the other things, all the other streets that don't have Sharrows not shared. Definitely have some conversations along those lines with folks. Yeah, I guess, you know, if you ask me, like going north along Willamette right at 13th, what that needs is a bike box. Just because, you know, the issue there isn't so much, in my mind, the conflict, because there's not enough room, because you've got the concrete dividers at the two mid-block crossings between, what is it, 12th and 11th. It's more the interaction, the merging right there.
We might be putting in a bike box there. Remember, we're doing 13th Avenue, the two-way bikeway. And so we'll have a signal there for bikes. And I can't remember how we're controlling that, but we spent a lot of time talking about it. And I think there's going to be a bike signal on Willamette. Because we talked about the bike box and how does somebody get into the north side bikeway on 13th from a right-hand bike lane. You'd have to get out of that and then take the lane and then turn left. And so then we talked about the bike box, and then it's still turning across traffic, and then how do you work the signal out? And so I think what we decided is to actually put a dedicated bike signal in there where you'll have your own phase. And so you could actually stay in the bike lane and turn in any direction you want to during that green phase. I think that's where we landed, but I can check on that. But yeah, absolutely, there should be something else there. And there will be soon.
So to Reed's comment there, we did talk about the cycle track at infrastructure, and it's really something I think it would be helpful to have programs committee on. Is that sort of, okay, they're going to launch it, and are people going to know how to use it? It's a new type of facility for Eugene. Dedicated bike phases are not something we have here. So I guess you put one in for the scramble crossing, right? So we have one, but other than that, I think it would be really helpful. I had a meeting earlier this morning with Kelsey and Cass about the university's support, but I think community support will be really helpful in making sure this is a successful facility and it's perceived as a successful facility. So when we look to put it on another street like Lincoln or High Street, there's less pushback.
Yeah, if Reed and Lee could just forward these comments specifically to Shane. I know that everything will go to him, but and then we on the program subcommittee can also talk about it. But we'll make sure that it gets to Shane so that he can definitely get us together for a meeting.
And so I'm working directly with Kelsey and Cass too, and they're going to do the outreach. And so, yeah, it would be great to get the program subcommittee on the messaging around that. This is going to be a little bit different. So the other place where we have a dedicated bike signal, Josh, is at Alder at 18th. And that uses loop detectors, which are in pavement. And 13th Avenue won't have loop detectors. So it's an infrared camera. And so it's going to be more difficult for people to figure out where they're supposed to be able to get the green light. And we're looking at various messages about how to tell folks to do that. And I think that entire first week, we're working on shifts to get people out there in orange vests to kind of monitor people's behavior and sort of reinforce good habits, that we're putting up signals so that you obey them. And this will work best if you do. And just let them know that you will be found, and that sometimes it takes a while, but you won't be there any longer than, I don't know, 60 or 65 seconds or whatever the timing is. But we don't really have signs that communicate that. We don't have messaging that communicates that. And Portland, if you ever visit bikeportland.org as the URL, they just put in some some Scandinavian bike countdown timers in Portland because they have the same issue. And so they'll have a bike signal, and then right under it, they'll have a kind of a countdown clock that shows how long until the signal turns green, so that folks don't decide that they weren't found and decide to dart out into the intersection. And so I anticipate that we're going to have that issue given how 13th at Alder performs. Not very well. And so, yeah, I think there's a variety of different tactics that we could take, and maybe we want some additional community involvement so that it's peer-to-peer communication and not the city saying, hey, this is supposed to work this way because it's our standard, but somebody saying, hey, it works best for everyone if we all follow the rules, or however you want to message that.
Okay.
You should just paint a tar diamond on the pavement so people think there are loop detectors in there.
That would work if people knew what
option.
loop detectors were, but people don't know that either. If you'd ever been to one of our Breakfast at the Bike Bridges, we painted diamonds on a carpet and rolled the carpet out at all of them, and we asked people to tell us what those were, and like nobody ever knew what they were. So then we started decorating them with bike stencils and putting signs next to them and says, hey, there's a stencil on the ground, be on that. And then we've intercept surveyed folks and kind of said, did you know that that's how that works? And so there's not a good message out there, and PSU is actually studying what that language should be. And I think it's going to be something like a box that says wait here for green in like a green box. And so I've even thought that maybe we should do some temporary sidewalk clings for the opening of 13th that says that exact message, so that folks know once they're in that space that they're going to get a green light eventually. And so we're looking at potentially printing something like that up, but there could be additional messaging that goes out to folks too, to kind of, I don't know, I want this to work. And if we want more of these, this has to work. And where it's going to fall down is people sort of deciding that they can kind of do whatever they want right now. And that's probably not the outcome we want.
All right. So we're ready to move on. Next section is project updates. I assume that's you as well, Reed.
We should stop putting this in as a placeholder.
How about we call, where are we on the West Bank Path resurfacing project?
Yes. So I was going to bring that one up. So it just went to bid. So if you go to the city's website right now and go to Public Works projects and bids, it's on there, and it's open until August 26th. So hopefully we get some good bids on that and we can start construction this calendar year and potentially even get that done. So we went through the appeals hearing because folks didn't want us to add lighting. The appeals official upheld that decision to add lighting. And so the whole thing is resurfacing and lighting, and we're bidding that all as one project right now for construction as soon as it can happen. Similarly, the South Bank Path, so that segment between where the new Riverfront Park is going to go and the Frohnmeyer Bridge is going to get reconstructed as well, and it's going to be realigned. So it's going to move away from the river a little bit, just down to the south where there's some informal desire lines through there already where people want to cut the bend. And so that's at 90% design, and we may end up bidding that this year as well. That is primarily on University of Oregon campus. And so it's sort of a different process for that one, but we were going to add lighting to that one as well. Because it is UO property, it's going to use the UO light fixture standard. So it's going to look more like campus than the rest of that path. Interestingly, the old path alignment that does go nearer to the river, we plan on pulverizing that and sort of making that gravel. And so that'll be available for people to walk. And right now we're debating whether or not to put signs in to sort of, ask folks on bikes to stay off of the soft surface paths like we do in Alton Baker Park. I made those recommendations today because I think that's probably a better idea for the intent of that. When we pulverize it, it'll probably only be about 6 feet wide. And so it's not really a multi-use path. And it's also a soft surface path. And so that's really meant for people walking. So those are the two shared use paths that we have out. And again, hopefully we can start construction and maybe even finalize West Bank this year. And then I think we'll bid South Bank this year. And I don't know if they'll be able to start construction or not. but it's not really going to matter until we open up the Riverfront Park next year, because that's what's going to complete the South Bank path and basically open up that entire segment. So all of that needs to be finalized before that becomes useful again. But that's moving forward. Other projects you're interested in?
Reed, I have a question about that South Bank path. Will the current South Bank path be usable while the construction of the new path is occurring?
Do you consider it usable right now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I used it the other day.
So the other part of that is the intersection at the Hilliard extension and 8th Avenue, because you can use that path right now to get between the Frohnmayer Bridge and 8th Avenue. But that's also a project that's supposed to happen along with the Riverfront Park. So there's the Riverfront Park, there's that intersection with 8th, and then there's this path project that I'm talking about. And that's the part that goes back into downtown. And that's supposed to happen about the same time. So whenever that closes, this entire South Bank path segment is basically not useful anymore. And I think the timing of those are tied. And so I think when it's being constructed that it's just going to be out of commission. We're going to ask folks to use the North Bank path, essentially the way that we're asking folks to do that now. Although, you know, to be frank, we had an on-site meeting with the railroad and they don't like our plans for that, for the path connection at Hilliard Street. So I don't know when that's going to happen, and I don't know what that's going to look like. So there's some stuff up in the air there, but I'm sensing a strong preference for keeping that path open as long as we can. Is that fair to say? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, okay. So I know that. Better. and it just depends on how all these other pieces come together.
Anyone else have any questions for Reed? Project related? All right.
I have kind of a random question. Is anybody thinking about removing beg buttons anywhere in the city in light of COVID?
No. So one of the things, I don't know that there's a great technology or a great replacement for that. There's infrared cameras, but a lot of times when we put the beg buttons in, they're next to an audible pedestrian signal. We have to do that for ADA. And usually that button also actuates or sends a call for the PED signal. And so, and people need to audibly be able to hear where that is to establish directionality. And generally they're going to end up pushing a button. I've seen some other communities work with microwave technology or infrared to kind of do more passive detection. None of those seem to work as well as the button does. And we've had a lot of discussions about disabling those beg buttons during COVID and then just putting the signal on recall so that you don't have to touch anything and so that the walk sign comes up automatically with every green phase.
Right, exactly.
That really changes the timing though, unfortunately. Our walk signal phases extend the green time by quite a bit, maybe 3 or 4 times as long as a green. Think about like Monroe at like 6th and 7th. The green signal for those is like very fast because there's usually only a couple cars there and they clear out pretty quick. If you add a pedestrian onto that and they have to cross 4 travel lanes and we're timing it for 2.8 feet per second, we have to be able to get from curb to curb with that. And so, you know, that's a much longer signal phase. And then so that ends up backing up like 6th and 7th. And as much as I wish, you know, we weren't still a slave to level of service standards for signal operations, we just are, and especially on 6th and 7th, because those are highways. So they're subject to ODOT regulations. The list goes on. So there's a number of reasons why we have what we have. And I think we're vigilant to, if there are innovations that get away from that at this point, I don't think that they're ready yet.
Anyone else? All right, then we can move on to info share. Anyone who has anything to share, if they just want to put their hand up, and I will go around and call on them individually. So information share. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I sat in this week on the Springfield Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee meeting. And one of the things that came up is their planned changes to the D Street, which is the connection from the North Bank Path down to downtown Springfield. And the plan that has been worked by the engineers is to change the apron to separate the pedestrians from the bikes to make it a smoother transition from bikes onto D Street. But in the meeting, there was a lot of pushback that was received, a lot of input from citizens, a lot of letters that came in suggesting that D Street's really quite a dangerous transition. There's that grade, and you got cars that try to overtake bikes, are rather impatient, and the sharrows are not a good solution. Just a lot of passion around that, and so all of that is going to be sent back to the council to work on. Should there be a dedicated bike lane solution for that D Street segment? I just bring all that up because I imagine people might have opinions about that, and if you do, now is probably the time to send those over to the BPAC so that they can get it to the council.
Anybody else have info share? Okay, well, I'll go ahead, and it kind of piggybacks off what Steve was saying. So I've been traveling out to the Thurston area more than I would like. And so I've been on Main Street, 126 a lot. And yeah, you got a nice little bike path, if I can call it that, bike lane, I mean, that takes you out there with lots of poles and things. But what I really kind of got annoyed with a couple times were Lane Transit District buses, the double length ones. And I know they're very used to driving because they're wide and they take up almost the whole lane. They drive very close to the white line. And I've been overtaken a couple times by the double decker buses, and I'm going maybe 22, 23 miles an hour. And you know, because they're right up against the white line and they're so large, they create that suction that pulls you laterally towards them. You know, it's unnerving, but you know, I've dealt with it my whole entire life riding, but I was hoping that LTD would be a little more cautious about things like that, and just to maybe give some guidance to their drivers. So I did send a short little message just explaining my experience and a suggestion that perhaps they could try, because there's 2 lanes, and both times that this overtaking had happened to me, there was no vehicle in the left lane, so they could have technically given me space. But anyway, it was just a reminder to them that maybe that's a good thing for them to perhaps let their drivers be aware of, because I could imagine that it's preventing a lot of people from using that corridor outside of just the danger feeling, because cars go so quickly on that road and it's straight and all that. But so anyway, I did send a message. I did indicate in the message that I was a member of the ATC, but that I was speaking as a member of the public. And I just sent that out this week. So anyway, it was more just to give them that information and see what they can do with it. Because I said we're all partners in alternate transportation and trying to get people to get out of their cars, and that not having the buses add to some of the fear that people have of riding and even walking in certain corridors could be helpful. So for what it's worth. Anyhow.
So I do have a project update.
Oh, okay.
Safe Routes to School is a dispersed project where we're doing pedestrian crossings near schools on Safe Routes to School. And the RFBs are delayed. And so what we decided to do was to actually stripe the crosswalks anyway. knowing that school is likely to be delayed and that hopefully the timing of when those RFBs come in coincide with when we might have more people or more activity on those safe routes to school. And so that's, I think I told the infrastructure subcommittee this, but I don't know if I told the entire ATC. I mean, that's a pretty big decision for us, because in the past we would not have striped a crosswalk anywhere unless we felt that it was going to be safe from day one. And so what we've decided is that let's put out our best effort and stripe things that we know will benefit folks, but would be better if they had a stutter flash beacon for pedestrians. And as soon as we get those devices, we're going to put them in. And what we think is going to happen is that they'll arrive in October, early October, late December, and we'll be able to put those all in real quick. And so I'm hoping that's what will happen. But if you see some crossings out there that look kind of suspect, like what is this? It could be that we're expecting a device, you know, and quite frankly, that was what I was concerned about with the 13th Avenue corridors, that we weren't going to have the signals ready to go by the time we wanted to open this, but we were so far ahead on that project, or behind, depending on how you want to look at it, that we had ordered those signals like 2 years ago. So we were good there. But moving forward, and this has been a problem over the past couple of years, is that when we want to put in some kind of a traffic control device, they're very hard to get. And so that speaks to doing good project planning from the outset, moving projects into the bid phase as quickly as we can, and getting things on order as soon as possible. Because we know it takes at least 6 months, more like 9 months, to procure any of those traffic control devices. And that's problematic for projects that rely on that. So the other one we're about to build is Northeast Livable Streets, which is also dispersed in a lot of pedestrian crossings. And that one has a lot of RFBs on it too. And I know we're not going to have those RFBs until next year. So it's going to, I might bring back to this committee whether or not we stripe those or start some of those crossing projects or not, because I don't know if we want them out there all winter without the appropriate level of enhancement to make sure that folks can see that those crosswalks are being used. So that's sort of an interesting update on sort of what's happening nationally. It's just hard to get metal poles, and it's hard to get traffic control devices right now.
Reed,
Okay.
I'm just curious, where are those devices manufactured?
I don't know.
All right.
I have one piece of information to share. The League of American Bicyclists just reported that there's data showing that the amount of speeding and the number of crashes has increased dramatically since, I believe, April, basically since the first lockdown let up. People are, I guess, feeling anxious and pent up and speeding. So just be safe out there.
Thank you, Alan. If there, oh, Julie, go ahead.
There was a story on KVEL about increased number of sort of road rage, I can't say that, incidents with bicycles. I actually saw it on Better Eugene Springfield's transit page. And I haven't actually seen the KVEL story, but I noticed it because I have noticed it myself. In fact, just this afternoon, I was riding up my own street, which is Harris Street, and stopped in front of a neighbor's house about 2 feet from the curb. So I was not out into the road. And, you know, a pickup just comes absolutely ripping through there and kind of swerves towards, you know, it's just that aggressive, you know, there's a lot of aggression out there that I am noticing as a cyclist. So just, yeah, be safe. More shared bike lanes. I'd love them to clip their tires on a concrete curb, sorry.
Yeah, I think people are more on edge. Shane mentioned it too when we set up the open streets in Bethel. A lot of people stopped and yelled. And that's unfortunate, but people are on edge, and when things change or things happen that they don't agree with, which there's probably a lot of that in the world right now, they are sort of ready to have a conversation with folks. And unfortunately, as people who walk and bike, we're pretty vulnerable to that. So yeah, I wish people would choose kindness. We need more of those signs, but yeah, it is definitely happening, and it's something that we're aware of.
Well, it's only 7 o'clock, but we've exhausted everything on our agenda. So if there are no other comments, I would say we are adjourned.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, staff, for all your hard work.
Thanks.
Yep. Good night, everybody.